Frozen alive to 100 degrees below zero, a 3-day-old embryo is held in suspended animation. As temperatures approach absolute zero, all chemical and biological activity ceases. In this state, frozen life might be preserved forever. Since the dawn of man, cold has been our cruelest enemy. Even today, blizzards claim a yearly toll of the unprepared. During winter, death by freezing remains a constant threat. Below the freezing point of water, 0 degrees Celsius, human flesh can freeze solid. Hands and feet are especially vulnerable to frostbite. In severe cases, the damage is irreversible. When flesh freezes, cells are usually disrupted beyond repair. Research has led to advances in design of protective clothing. Along the Alaskan pipeline, properly dressed workers are safe down to minus 60 degrees Celsius. Below such temperatures, however, cold becomes increasingly lethal.
For most of us, once temperatures drop into the sub-zero range, we've reached the limit of our knowledge about cold. We all know that food keeps better in a refrigerator, that it lasts even longer in a freezer. But beyond freezer temperatures, we enter the realm of cryogenics, the realm of the very cold.
At 196 degrees below zero, nitrogen, the main ingredient of air, becomes liquid. 73 degrees further down, helium, the gas most resistant to cold, also becomes liquid. As temperatures drop still further, we approach the ultimate limit of minus 273 degrees, or absolute zero. To understand how freezing damage occurs, MIT scientists freeze cells under controlled thermal conditions. Using a special cryomicroscope, they have made films and videotapes of blood cells, embryos, and human tissue cells. Red blood cells are relatively easy to freeze safely. With the aid of protective chemicals and moderate cooling speeds, most cells survive. If they're chilled at the correct rate, even human tissue cells sometimes survive freezing. But when the freezing is too fast, ice forms within the cells, causing them to flash black and die. In nature, not all living things die when they are frozen. Some trees and plants have adapted to the bitter Arctic winter. Certain insects, like the tardigrade, survive below minus 50 degrees.
The tardigrade and other Arctic insects freeze in winter and thaw without ill effect in summer. Is it conceivable that larger animals, perhaps even people, could survive freezing? To answer this provocative question, we must first examine the state-of-the-art of freezing the separate elements of life.
At the Carnation Genetics Company in California, workers get a sample of sperm from a prize bull. They add the sperm to a solution of glycerol, the same chemical Arctic insects produce to prevent freezing damage. The sperm is frozen in liquid nitrogen at 196 degrees below 0 Celsius. At this low temperature, it remains in a state of suspended animation. Months or even years later, the sperm will be shipped to cattle breeders. They thaw the sperm, bringing it back to life, and use it to artificially inseminate their cows. By carefully matching bulls and cows, farmers have vastly improved production of milk and beef. At the Tyler Clinic in Los Angeles, human sperm is preserved for many years. Reportedly, there have been human births from sperm kept in frozen suspended animation for over 10 years. No one knows how long it keeps its potency. Human sperm frozen today could possibly sire a child hundreds or even thousands of years from now. Blood is the very symbol of life. It carries warmth and oxygen to all parts of the body. Today, however, blood freezing is routine. The red cells are protected by adding glycerol. Since frozen blood cells stay alive for many years, their use has greatly increased the available supply of this precious substance. The frozen blood can be thawed and the glycerol washed out in less than an hour. Dr. Charles Huggins directs the blood bank at Massachusetts General Hospital. He is also a pioneer on the next frontier of cryogenics, the preservation of whole organs by freezing.
By freezing the organ, you would make it much easier to coordinate the donor organs and the potential recipient, and a much higher percentage of people could have successful transplants with good genetic matching. And I don't think there's any fundamentally unsolvable problem, but it's not going to come in the next day or two, and in fact I think it'll be quite a number of years before we have clinical banks of kidneys and hearts and that sort of thing.
Attempting to solve the organ freezing problem, biologists chill living tissue below the ice point. They observe how blood vessels are damaged when the tissues freeze. Such difficulties limit the size of organs which can be frozen. At UCLA, Dr. Josiah Brown has frozen the tiny pancreas gland of fetal rats and successfully transplanted it into adult rats.
We're trying to work out in the rat pancreas the technique for freezing the pancreas so that it can be frozen permanently and implanted into a diabetic animal in order to reverse the diabetes. Our vision, our dream, is to have a laboratory with large banks of frozen pancreases and then implant a donor organ into the diabetic human and have it function.
Of all life processes, none is more awesome than the growth of a tiny embryo into a complete animal. If human embryos could be frozen successfully, we could send our children on journeys into the distant future. Protected by a chemical called DMSO, a mouse embryo is carefully frozen. Icy fingers hold it hostage down to 100 degrees below zero, suspending all growth or change. After thawing, the embryo swells back to normal size, ready to continue its development. At the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, scientists have frozen mouse embryos in liquid nitrogen. They take embryos from the uterus of a pregnant mouse. The embryos are gently put in DMSO. Then, the scientists freeze the living embryos and store them in liquid nitrogen. Days later, the embryos will be thawed and reimplanted in the wombs of other mice. Remarkably, they develop into normal, healthy mice. Soon after the mouse experiments, cattle breeders also began freezing embryos. They flush week-old embryos out of cows known to have superior calves. By super-ovulating with fertility drugs, they can get as many as 15 embryos per cow. The embryos are cooled slowly in DMSO, then plunged into liquid nitrogen and held in cold storage. When it is time to bring them to life, the breeders thaw the embryos, remove the chemical antifreeze, and prepare cows for implantation. They inject an embryo into the cow's womb and sew her up. The embryo will grow naturally to term.